What's up, Packers fans? Mark Oldacres here with the second installment of the Packers Prospects series here on CHTV. And today we're going to be talking about wide receivers. Now, the Packers, they look pretty set at wide receiver based on the current players on the roster, but there's always room to improve and add competition, as Brian Gutekunst has alluded to this offseason. And we're going to talk about 5 players who I think the Packers might be interested in based on traditionally the kind of athletic thresholds and size, things like that they have valued. So before we're going to get into the players, we're just going to go through kind of the general parameters that they look for. The main thing here, much like with the running back position, is size. And they don't need their wide receivers to be huge necessarily, but they don't traditionally take small wide receivers. The smallest receiver that Brian Gutekunst has drafted in his time as GM was Amari Rodgers. He was 5'9", 0.4 inches. And even Amari Rodgers was kind of known as an outlier, that they kind of went a little bit outside of what they usually do in that regard. After him, if you take him out of the equation, the smallest is 5'10", 0.7 inches, which was Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed is also the lightest wide receiver that the Packers have drafted under Brian Gutekunst. He was 187 pounds at the combine, which is a little bit lighter than they usually do, but they've shown they will go to that level now. So that's something to consider going forward. If there's those guys who are kind of in the mid 180s, can they ask them to put on a couple pounds? And maybe they could be in play. Someone like a Lad McConkey, for example. But he's not a player we're going to talk about specifically today. Okay, so other than that, I mean, they like agility at the wide receiver position. They have taken bad agility receivers, but the 3-cone is usually one that they like to be under 6.96 seconds, which is kind of in the upper third of testing in that drill. So that's something that they do value. But other than that, it's kind of a mixed bag. They'll draft receivers who are maybe on the slower end, that are kind of in the upper 4.5s. The slowest is 4.6, which was Jamon Moore, if you remember him. And but they'll draft guys who are maybe slower, but the agility scores are really high, the explosion scores are really high. They still like athletes at the position in general. As long as you can kind of make up for maybe one deficiency somewhere with something else, then they're likely to still be interested if you meet most of what they're looking for. But moving on to the actual players themselves that we're going to talk about today. The first player is Brendan Rice of USC. Jerry's son, of course. He is 6'2", 0.3 inches and 208 pounds. His relative athletic score is 8.82 out of 10. He has not done the agility testing. We'll have to see if he does that at his pro day. I don't think anyone in this list, maybe one person, has done the agility testing. Most guys seem to be doing that at their pro day rather than at the combine. But he had a good speed score, a good explosion score, nothing off the charts, but just good all around. And obviously the size is a benefit as well. He's going to be 22 years old in his rookie season. In his final year at USC, he had just under 800 yards, which is nothing to necessarily, boast about. It's solid, but it's not spectacular. But he did have 12 touchdowns, which is obviously very, very impressive. My sort of take on him, he's just a very, very well-rounded receiver. He's shown that he can win versus man and zone coverage. He's just a good route runner. I mean, you'd expect that. The son of Jerry Rice is going to be a good technician at the position, even at a young age. The touchdown production is obviously there, which is important. And even though he doesn't have that elite athletic trait in any one area, he shows the ability to make big plays, and that is obviously a big part of the position too. And he blocks, which is something that you kind of have to do if you're going to get on the field in Matt LaFleur's offense. You'll notice that's a theme with these guys. Every receiver that I'm going to talk about today is at least a capable blocker or has effort as a blocker. It's obviously a really important thing for the Packers. So Brendan Rice, yeah, he's a really well-rounded player. I almost don't think he's getting enough buzz considering how good his game is and the fact that he's Jerry Rice's son. You'd think he would kind of be, I don't know, just pumped up a little bit more. But a good player in my opinion, and someone that the Packers could target definitely on day 2. Most of these guys were looking kind of in the day 2 range. I can't see the Packers taking a first-round receiver this year. If they haven't done it before, this year doesn't seem like the year to do it, but I guess you never know. The second guy we're going to talk about is Xavier Legette of South Carolina. Now, he's a really interesting player. He's a very just unique profile. And there's a couple of those in this list that we're going to go through. But he's 6'1", 221 pounds, so he's thick. He's really well built. And he really, really crushed the combine. A 9.92 relative athletic score. Again, no agility testing, but his speed and explosion scores were both elite. He ran a 4.39 in the 40. He will also be 22 during his rookie season, or I think 23 actually. In his final year at South Carolina, over 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns, which is obviously a tremendous season. The oddity with him is that before that, in the 4 previous seasons combined, he only had 400 yards, which is just very strange. And that's something I'm sure any team that kind of interviews him will want to know about, and why the spike in production, why was there such a lack of production before that. But he's just a really intriguing player. I mean, the body type, you can see the athleticism, but it was important for him that he did test well, because he's not your kind of traditional wide receiver. He's not really a route runner. He's not winning in the traditional way you expect NFL wide receivers are going to have to win at the next level. But he has the ability in his body, he's explosive, and he can win at the catch point, which is obviously 2 real strengths there that you can win with. So that was obviously massive for him to test well at the combine and show that he really is that upper level athlete. It almost reminds me a little bit of when Treylon Burks was coming out a couple of years ago, and he didn't test as well at the combine, and people kind of said, well, at his size, and he was a bit bigger than Legette, I believe, but at his size, his numbers weren't that bad, and that was true, except he wasn't really a route runner. He wasn't a technician. He was about physicality and athleticism, and that's what you were betting on. And then he didn't test kind of in the upper echelon that people expected. But Legette, with that testing, he's put himself firmly in the minds, you would think, of the Packers front office. He would bring a different kind of skill set to the Packers that they don't really have at the moment. And he, again, second day, maybe second round even. He's with the 2 second-round picks that the Packers have. He's definitely one to consider. Moving on to Ricky Pearsall from Florida. He is 6'1", 189 pounds at the combine. I believe he weighed in a little bit heavier at the Senior Bowl. 9.78 relative athletic score. His speed, explosion, and agility scores were all in the great category. So he did actually do the agility scores and drills and crush those. He will be 24 during his rookie season. We're seeing more and more of that now, but it's something to consider, especially when you kind of talk about his best year of production was in his final year, which is fine. It was 965 yards and 4 touchdowns. But when you're doing that as an older player, there will always be the question of whether it was just kind of the playing against younger guys, like you're more experienced, you've grown into your body more than the opponents you're playing against most weeks. But he is a really, really fun player. His tape is really good. He's another guy who just has a really, really solid, like all around skill set. He's probably never going to be a spectacular player. But again, him going to the combine and performing as well as he did, I don't think people maybe saw that on tape. But it really proves that what you see on tape should be able to translate to the NFL. And it wasn't just a case of him beating up younger competition in college. He's probably pushed himself up to day 2 now. He may not have been there before he tested. You might have been talking maybe early round 4, something like that. But he's firmly in that day 2 conversation after the combine that he had. Moving on next to Johnny Wilson, another Florida player who played his college ball in Florida at Florida State. He is truly one of one, pretty much at the wide receiver position. 6'6", 231 pounds. He's basically built like a tight end. And not only does he have the size, he tested incredibly, surprisingly well at the combine. 9.88 RAS. He did not do the 3-cone drill, but he did everything else. The speed score was good, great explosion, and the shuttle drill as well was very good. So he showed off that agility as well. And you can see it on tape with him. He moves surprisingly well for his size, more than you would think he has kind of any right to, really. And he has the potential to be a real matchup problem, when he gets to the league. Just who do you line up against this guy? It is genuinely going to be a bit of a problem for defensive coordinators to game plan for. He'll be 23 during his rookie season. The production with him, not so good. 900 yards in his penultimate season with 5 touchdowns, and then that dropped down to only around 600 yards and 2 touchdowns in his final season. And he was on a roster where, okay, yes, he was with Keon Coleman, the ball's being fed there, but that should have given him more one-on-one opportunities and maybe chances to thrive. And you kind of didn't see that as much. But teams are still going to bet on just the unique size and profile that he has. And he's another player, probably looking at kind of round 3 for him. But he's certainly an option for the Packers if they want just something completely different to anything that they have right now. And then last but not least, this is the quintessential Packers receiver, and it's Javon Baker from UCF. 6'1", 202 pounds, and his RS 7.84. It's good. It's above average, well above average. It's not elite. He didn't do the agility scores, so they might want to see those as without them, it's not kind of in that upper echelon by itself. But he had good speed score, a good explosion score, just like Brendan Rice did. He'll only be 22 during his rookie season, and he has something else that the Packers really like at the wide receiver position, and that is production, history of production. He had over 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns in his final season at UCF, and the year before he had nearly 800 yards and 5 touchdowns. So production in back-to-back years, and you see improvement over those 2 years. That's exactly what they want to see. He reminds me of Dontavian Wicks so much. Like, it's incredible when you watch it. Again, just he's such a professional receiver, like a couple of these guys I mentioned. The route running, the hands, it's just so clean. He blocks with great effort. The thing with him is he may never be that real big play guy. Again, I think his 40 was in the mid 4.5s, which is around where Dontavian Wicks' was at his pro day, I believe, once he kind of corrected the combine number. So he's probably not going to be the guy that runs, and catches an 80-yard go ball, but he's just a really professional receiver and someone that you want in any receiver room. I just mentioned 5 guys here, but this year, honestly, there is so many players that the Packers are going to be interested in. It's going to be really difficult for them to not pick up a receiver. I just don't know if Brian Gutekunst is going to be able to help himself. Just some of the names to throw out there to keep in mind that I just didn't get to talking about today. Adonai Mitchell, Brian Thomas, Devontae Walker, Cornelius Johnson, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, Jermaine Burton and Rome Odunze, who they're not getting anywhere near Rome Odunze, but this is just the list of guys that have already kind of proven themselves to be exactly what the Packers are looking for. It's another really strong wide receiver class, and if the Packers want to add to their room, then they have a great chance of doing it this year. Hope you enjoyed this episode, guys. Leave in the comments below who you think the Packers should be targeting at wide receiver in the draft if they are going to take one. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Go check out my stuff over at cheeseheadtv.com and go Pack Go.